Today we're looking at a compilation of Mao Zedong's works, on practice and on contradiction. If the name Mao rings a bell, it's probably because he was an unbelievable Chad and led the anti-capitalist revolution of the largest country on the planet, all while revolutionizing the theoretical and philosophical underpinnings of Marxism itself, and smoking more than a preteen working a 12-hour shift in the coal mines of Victorian England. Probably one of the most important thinkers of the past 100 years if I had to pick one, so you should probably pay attention. Hello and welcome to Simply Radical, your personal ticket to understandable radical left-wing theory. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm glad you're here, and I hope you'll stick around for a bit. Most of my videos here are summaries of books written by authors better informed than me, from an MLM perspective. Sometimes I also make videos about specific ideas or events. If you've got a suggestion for me, please drop it in the comments. I'm always looking for y'all's feedback. If you want to keep up to date with my latest videos, go ahead and click that subscribe button below, and if you're a freak, you can even click the bell icon for notifications. Alright, without further ado, let's get this shit show on the road. Chapter 2.
Go outside, nerd!
Oppose book worship. I know, this feels out of left field for a Marxist. That's like our whole thing, right? Well, Mao didn't think so. In fact, Mao and I feel that Marxism is very much negatively impacted by the cult of the written word that self-evidently exists within Marxist circles. This sort of mechanical blind faith, while usually well-meaning in its goal to avoid the watering down of existing Marxist theory with bad ideas, is also inherently anti-dialectical. As we've already gone over, Marxism lives and breathes, and changes with different times and material circumstances. Marxism was not exactly the same in China as it was in Russia, and it will not be the same as either in the US when we finally pull our heads out of our collective ass and create it. Marxism is a toolbox, not a flawless holy text. In Mao's time, this tendency most clearly reared its head in relation to the question of the peasantry. As we covered in my last video, most Chinese people at the time of their revolution actually did not belong to the working class, but rather to the peasantry. Most Marxists at the time thought that the peasant class was an inherently regressive one more likely to ally with the business owners in any revolution than with the workers. And importantly, that idea came from previous Marxist experiences, specifically in Russia a few decades before. Luckily, Mao didn't take this at face value, or in his words, he opposed that book worship. Mao did the work, actually going among the peasantry and investigating deeply the material circumstances they operated under. That allowed him to come up with a way to link the peasants to the struggle of the working class. In fact, before he led the largest communist revolution in the history of the world, Mao was well known specifically for his expertise on the peasant class. That is the context in which this chapter comes, written as it was in 1930 as a piece of self-criticism directed at the leadership of the CCP, which at this point was following the line of the Soviets. This line included Stalin's phobia of the peasantry, which he and his party developed from their interactions with the kulak class. I'm sure I'll get into that at some point, but for now, suffice to say that the kulaks of the USSR were wealthy peasants that did indeed side with the business owners against the Russian communists. As such, much of the initial construction of the USSR was built in opposition to the peasant class. The Russians then told their Chinese comrades about that experience. Luckily though, Mao's careful and in-depth study of the Chinese context showed that the same basic contradictions between the peasantry and the working classes that caused that divide in Russia did not exist in China. In fact, the peasantry at the time was mostly inclined to work with the communists, against the business owners. This chapter aims to illustrate how Mao found this crucial difference, and to provide a framework for future revolutionaries to use that same tool in their own contexts. It begins with something that should be obvious, but is unfortunately not to many. No investigation into a topic, no right to speak on that topic. As Mao says, when you have not probed into a problem, into the present facts and its past history, and know nothing of its essentials, whatever you say about it will undoubtedly be nonsense. Talking nonsense solves no problems, as everyone knows. So why is it unjust to deprive you of the right to speak? He's right, of course. If I have an electrical problem in my home, I don't give a fuck what the baker next door has to say about it. I call him electrician. Same goes for politics. If you don't even know what the class structure of your society is, why does it matter how you feel about the direction that those classes should move in? You don't know what's going on. Shut up. The second tool Mao talks about is the power of direct investigation. Again, something that should be obvious, but is unfortunately not for many. I don't think I could say any better than the man himself. Conclusions invariably come after investigation and not before. Only a blockhead cudgels his brains to find a solution or evolve an idea without first making some investigation. It must be stressed that this cannot possibly lead to an effective solution or a good idea. This, Mao says, is often a problem with newly appointed party officials, who are prone to speak loudly louder and more often than their knowledge warrants. If they have not investigated the topic themselves, they are, at best, parroting someone that did, and at worst, speaking entirely from their own personal perspective, something that is not only self-centered and stupid as hell, but also inherently anti-materialist. When presented with a problem, Mao insists, one must get moving on their own two legs, and inquire into everything, as Confucius did. Obviously, you can't solve a problem until you understand what it is, how it works, and how the circumstances around it can be changed to eliminate it. To avoid the work of investigation, one is either the blockhead mentioned earlier, or a coward, in Mao's eyes. All of this, of course, takes time, which is why he compares the process to a pregnancy. Quote, investigation may be likened to the long months of pregnancy, and solving a problem to the day of birth. To investigate a problem is, indeed, to solve it. And now we come to the main thrust of this chapter, opposing book worship. Mao remarks on the mindset of many peasants at the time, who thought that whatever is written in a book is right. He compares this attitude of the uneducated, likely barely literate, farmer to that of the supposedly highly educated and well-read members of the Communist Party. When presented with a counter-argument, their first instinct is the same. Show me where it's written in the book. This sort of closed-mindedness is incredibly harmful, not only in that it exaggerates internal party hierarchies and discourages the critical thought and internal debate that makes party organizations effective and desirable in the first place, but it also is, quote, not really to carry it out, but is the most artful way of opposing or sabotaging it. Studying social sciences exclusively from a book is like studying the Himalayas from Paris. Yeah, there's useful information that you can get from books and so on, but how much do you really know about the mountains if you've never set foot in them? In fact, Mao observes that that approach had led many down the path of an anti-revolutionary, for several reasons. Among them, the way that it leads the reader to idolize the author. Per Mao, when we say Marxism is correct, it is certainly not because Marx was a prophet, but because his theory has been proven correct in our practice and in our struggle. Of course we should study Marxist books, but this study must be integrated with our country's actual conditions. We need books, but we must overcome book worship, which is divorced from the actual situation. To integrate knowledge gained by study with material conditions, real life, effort must be made to get out amongst the people, to see, hear, and study the economic and political structures that surround them, as well as the incentive and disciplinary systems that support those structures. I know this is hard to hear, but you have to actually touch grass. Not only do you actually have to go outside and talk to people, but you have to ask the right questions. Mao criticizes some of his comrades, who are doing the necessary investigation, but not in a detailed enough way. The main goal, as Mao puts it, is to learn the political and economic situation of the various classes, as well as the ups and downs of their development. This involves not only counting the number of peasants versus capitalists, but also recording internal class divisions, and the structures that create and perpetuate class divides. We don't only need to know how many peasants there are, but also how many own their own farmland, how many are tenant farmers, how much money they make per year, and so on. Same goes for capitalists. What do their companies sell? How much? Where does it come from? How big are they compared to other capitalists? What role do they play in the global economy? The more and more detailed questions you ask, the better your view of that class becomes, and the better your view of the class, the easier it is to see how they relate with other classes. Quote, our chief method of investigation must be to dissect the different social classes, the ultimate purpose being to understand their interrelations, to arrive at a correct appraisal of class forces, and then to constitute the main force in the revolutionary struggle, which classes are to be won over as allies, and which are to be overthrown. The next logical question is, which classes should we investigate? Well, assuming you're talking about China in the 1930s, Mao has an answer for you. The industrial proletariat, handicraft workers, farm laborers, poor peasants, urban poor, lumpen proletariat, master craftsmen, small merchants, middle peasants, rich peasants, landlords, commercial bourgeoisie, and industrial bourgeoisie. Wow, that's a lot more than the two classes you usually hear about. Bingo. Now you know why Marxism is so complicated. Every one of these classes, or subclasses, has different material circumstances, and relate to all the others differently. This is still the case today, though many of these specific classes are no longer super relevant. It's not good enough to just say, Soviet bad, Amazon workers good, even if that is correct. There is much more at play, and in order to properly influence the whole game, you have to understand all the players and how they fit together on the team. This is the same point that Mao himself makes, although in a different context. One of the issues he saw with his party's actions before 1937 was that they were too focused on the rural mountain folk, meaning that their plans for the urban poor and big business owners had not yet been clarified.
What are you doing with your life?
and could not be acted on at the same time. At this point, Mao zooms out a bit to put all of this in context. The hypothetical goal of all of this is to attain socialism via a democratic revolution. Democratic in the sense that it's widely popular, not in that we should give up all of our principles and suckle at the decrepit teat of Joe Brandon and the other drogger of electoral politics. In order to do such a revolution, hypothetical, step 1 is to win the majority of the country to your cause, and step 2 is to, purely hypothetically of course, overthrow the current government. In Mao's context, step 1 was basically already done, so he spent more time discussing step 2. Winning a civil war depends on the military strength, tactical and strategic talents, and organizational efficiency of the group waging the war, in this case the Communist Party. In order to maximize all of those stats, Mao says, the party must be constantly critically engaging with the front lines of the struggle, both literally and physically. If there is a misstep or a failure, it must immediately be analyzed, diagnosed, and the lessons learned and incorporated into future actions. As he says, those comrades who are inflexible, conservative, formalistic, and groundlessly optimistic think that the present tactics of struggle are perfect, that the book of documents of the party's 6th National Congress guarantees lasting victory, and that one can always be victorious by adhering to the established methods. These ideas are absolutely wrong, and have nothing in common with the idea that communists should create favorable new situations through struggle. They represent a purely conservative line. Now that we know what we need to do, Mao moves on to discuss how we do it. A great way to start is by holding fact-finding meetings and investigating through discussion. A group is always better than one person because it helps to account for personal bias, something that of course can never be completely eliminated, but can be averaged out when weighed against the perspective of many others. But what kind of people should be in these meetings? Well, building off of our rule of no investigation, no right to speak, it must be people who are well informed on the state of social, economic, and political conditions. Mao also mentions that he preferred the guidance of elders, who are rich in experience. That isn't to say that he disregards the opinions of the youth, however, as he also specifies that young people should be included for their progressive ideas and sharp eyes. The implication, to me at least, is that a diverse cross-section of ages is best. As far as their professions, Mao calls for a wide array of talents, from workers and peasants to merchants, intellectuals, soldiers, and even quote-unquote vagrants. What is most important is that the people assembled have relevant and direct experience with the topic being discussed. Soldiers are not needed when collegiate education is discussed, and peasants are not needed when high-tech is discussed. In terms of the size of the meeting, the main limitation is the organizational skill of the person holding the meeting. A larger meeting is almost always better because it helps to average out any outliers, but there are growing concerns of not being able to keep things focused and orderly. The hard rule Mao indicates is that there should never be a meeting with fewer than 3 attendees, as the information gained from such a small sample size is far too limited to draw conclusions from. Finally, once the meeting has been coordinated, Mao provides a few extra tips to get as much out of it as possible. First, prepare an outline in advance. This allows the investigator to keep things structured and ensures that they cover all the needed ground. Second, Mao insists that all party leaders, no matter how local, must actively participate in their investigations, rather than simply reading reports given to them by others. This prevents the separation of the investigator and investigated, and also allows for Mao's next pro-strat, probing deeply. The deeper that an investigator delves, the more rewarding and successful the investigation will be, and the easier later investigations will be as well. Finally, Mao insists that the investigator must be present in person at meetings, and also must record their own notes. As he says, to have others do it for him is no good. If you're new to this, let me know how I did. Does this make any sense at all, or are you more confused than you were before? If you're old to this, let me know what you think I missed, and leave your reading recommendations in the comments. If you've somehow made it to the end of this monster video, and would like to see more communist content, please negate the algorithm's distaste for progressive revolutionary content by liking and subscribing, and maybe tossing a link or two to a bud, preach. Lastly, but most importantly, the views expressed in this video are solely those of the book's author,
Mao Zedong,
and do not necessarily reflect the views of the video creator. It has been made solely for educational and entertainment purposes, and the creator does not make any representation or warranties with respect to the accuracy, applicability, fitness, or completeness of the content within. Please don't hurt me.